Days before that in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, there was a white woman having a baby. So I felt a little kinship to him, as I do with other people. I mean, anybody born in 1929 can be my brother or sister. And I did feel that. I felt that kind of a mystical connection. You may have had it at some time or another. There, in my hometown, in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, there were no blacks. At least there were none that I ever knew. And I had an experience one time that it was very simple and everything, but it was profound because it always stayed in my mind. And again, I don't know exactly why. I was 6 or 7 years old playing in front of the house, in front of my house, and a black man came along with a cart, a horse-drawn cart. And he was a businessman of some sort. He had some business going. I was 6 or 7, I didn't know whatever that might be. But as I was there, and he came up with the horse-drawn cart, because you see, I was born a long time ago. He said to me, he says, "Young man, can you come over here and stay by my wagon and just watch it? Just watch it for me. I just don't want anything to happen to the horse." And I said, "Yes, I'm happy to do that." So he went inside one of the houses, came out a couple of minutes later. He said, thank you very much." And he said, "Here's for your trouble." Now, in those days, you could buy 2 candy bars for a nickel. He put a nickel in my hand. Gave me a nickel right in my hand. And I remember the nickel's in my hand, and he drives away. This black man who has been so generous and everything drives away. And I think about him, my first experience I ever had, as far as I know, with a black. And I look at the nickel, I think there might be something wrong with this nickel. And I threw it in the sewer. I threw it in the sewer. And I've thought about that, you know, ever since. So for the last 39 years of my life, or however many it is, yeah. And I thought, that's really weird. And then later on I would go on and work in San Francisco, and my first job for the first 14 years was in an all-black school in the Black District of San Francisco, working with parents and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really know what my feelings were at that time. I don't know what they are today, but it was something very significant for me. And then, of course, being Jewish, you know, you have Passover, you have the history of Passover, just in terms of my background. And every year, what do you study about during Passover? And a lot of people know in here, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people do. You study about the Jews, how the Jews were slaves in Egypt, and how they were very unhappy there. They were very miserable. They didn't want to be slaves. Like Abe Lincoln said, you know, he said, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not own a slave." The Jews weren't happy being slaves there, and eventually Moses, who had been adopted by the Egyptian princess and raised as an Egyptian, would eventually lead the Jews out of Egypt by going through all the different plagues. And you know, it's all in the Old Testament, and it's all true. As a matter of fact, they recently narrowed it down. Ramses I was the ruler of the Pharaoh of Egypt at that time. But he would lead them out of Egypt and go through the Red Sea, and the Red Sea parted, and the Egyptian army changed their mind. They were drowned and all that. And then eventually the Israelites would get to the Promised Land. And Martin Luther King, of course, was a minister. He was a Baptist minister, and he knew the Bible backwards and forwards and by heart. And he always quoted that. Whenever he gave a talk, he quoted Moses. Moses leading the Israelites to freedom, to the Promised Land. And that was his goal. That's what he wanted to do. And that's what he told the people continually. And that he would do that. We will win. We will succeed. We will overcome. Absolutely. We're going to the Promised Land. For them, the Promised Land was not somewhere else, as Liberia had been some 50 years before, but it was right in the United States, but the land of freedom. It would become the land of freedom. And they will tell you this, you know, it's going to be freedom not just for the blacks, but it's going to be freedom for the whites too. Because how good can it be to be in connection with slaves, to put up with slavery, to have slaves around you, not only not own them, but to come in contact with it. The whole concept has to make you ill a little bit. So he said, we're going to free the blacks, we're going to free ourselves, but we're going to free you whites also. And it's true. You know, it's absolutely true. There are no slaves in America anymore, and we're better off for it. But so since he talked about that, it was almost like he was a rabbi. He was always talking about it. And one other thing that he said, which was so prophetic, and I don't know that he knew it, but who knows, whatever goes through a brilliant person like that. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt into almost into the promised land, but not into the promised land. And it tells you in the Bible that God would not allow Moses to go in because he said the promised land must be started by people who are born free. And you are not born free. So anybody, that's one of the reasons that they wandered for 40 years. You know, 2 generations went by. The old people went to another happy hunting ground kind of thing. And Moses was not allowed to go to the promised land. His brother Joshua, who had been born in the desert, led the people in. And Martin Luther King said, "And I may not make it with you." And he was right. But he didn't know it at the time. He said, "I may not make it with you, but we will be there." Got back to California on the airplane, and there were some reactions to that. And I thought I wanted to share some of those with you. Of course, there were newspaper articles. One of the first things that happened when I got off the plane, my family was there to meet me, was that the newspapers were there. I guess it was the Pacifica Tribune from Pacifica. It was a big one there. We had lived in Pacifica. And they took pictures, they filmed everything, they took a long story. So that was very interesting, because one of the things, you know, we said to people before we left, to the black leadership and the black people that we lived with, what can we do? What can we do once we get back to California to help the cause? Because the cause was not over yet. Things had not really been won. And they said, you have to publicize everything for us. You have to discuss things. You have to go give speeches, let everybody know what's going on here. And so we did that. We did that. And eventually, one of the things what happened to me when I went back to work was that I had a letter from the San Francisco Unified School District saying that they were going to dock my pay because I had been on something that was illegal. You know, I'd been arrested and all that kind of stuff. I was like a criminal, almost a criminal. Well, I had to have a few conferences there, and one of the things that happened, there were some good things that happened out of this whole business, unintended consequences in a sense. I had to go and speak to the attorney for the Board of Education to find out whether I should be docked for that 1 week's pay. And the attorney that I was sent to was a Jewish fella. His name was Irving Breyer. He had been attorney for the San Francisco Unified School District for like 30 years, 35 years. He was a fixture there. And when I spoke to him and I told him about Rabbi Morris and all my experience with the rabbis and all, he said, "There's no problem. You will not be docked. You just go back to work and everything will be fine. They'll fix it up." And one reason it's so interesting for me is that Irving Breyer's son, Stephen Breyer, is on the Supreme Court of the United States right now. So if I ever meet Stephen Breyer, if somebody will ever introduce me to him, I can talk to him about the experience I had with his father. So I thought that was very interesting. And I would, of course, give talks and everything. But Linda is the person that I really have to thank so very much, because she's the one who wants to preserve this. See, this is a lot of work for me. But she wants it preserved for future generations. A kind of a living history, an oral history, that it should be recorded and go down in the books. And maybe if somebody wants to research this 100 years from now, I won't have to think of coming back to do that, which would be a little bit difficult. So she's absolutely right. When I got back to school, it was very interesting, this all-black school in the Fillmore district with the parents and everything. I was a hero. I was an automatic hero. Because they had never, just like I had never met a person who was won the Nobel Peace Prize in my life until that trip, they had never known a white person who had participated in anything like this, who had placed himself in danger, in jeopardy. And the story, I was of course asked to give a report on what I had done to the student body at the school, all 1,300 students. And so I became a kind of a